Today we're going to take a look at a very common method throughout computer programming, and this has to do with conditional statements. A conditional statement is any statement where we say, if this condition is true, perform this process. If this condition is not true, usually we say do nothing or do something else. And these can become increasingly sophisticated. You can end up with multiple conditions, you can end up with nested conditions, but we're going to focus on the most straightforward cases. Starting with a simple example, I want to point you to this diagram. This is a helpful way to think about a conditional program. We start with some initial condition, and the program checks, is that condition true or not? If true, we follow this path and perform some operation. We'll start by just printing a statement. So let's see this in the form of an example. An example we could consider is making decisions based on the temperature. If it's hot out, we'll go swimming. If it's cold out, we can go sledding. So this is a diagram of what this program might look like. First, we would start with some kind of input temperature. We'll go with Fahrenheit. And then we say if the temperature is greater than 90 degrees, yet if that condition is true, then we say I'm going swimming. Then we return back to the main path of the program and check for other conditions. So in this case, the events are mutually exclusive, right? It's going to be either one or the other. So the program is just going to stop. If the temperature is over 90 degrees, then we'll print I'm going swimming. Let's go through in the case where the temperature is less than 90 degrees. If the temperature is less than 90 degrees, then we're going to check to see if it's less than 30 degrees. That's our additional condition. If it is, then we print I'm going sledding. You'll notice that we're not encompassing all possible conditions, and that's okay for now. So let's look at this in a program in Python. And to illustrate this, we're going to look at what's called a Jupyter notebook, and we're going to introduce this in class today. We'll go over how we can use this notebook to type some text and also run some code in individual segments, which we'll find is really useful. So I've just written a program here to follow the pattern that I've gone over. We start with an input temperature. I'm going to start with 42. And we'll see why this is a meaningful choice. If the temperature is over 90 degrees, we're going to print I'm going swimming. Now notice the syntax here. I have a colon at the end of the conditional statement, and then there's an indent in front of the response that I want to print. And that indent is critical. So if we don't have the indent, the program won't work. So we can just use a tab to get that indent. Next condition, we bump back out the indent. So if temperature is less than or equal to 30 degrees, we print I'm going sledding. It's not important that I have inclusive statements in my program, and I didn't in the diagram. That's okay. So I'm going to go ahead and run it. But notice that nothing happens because I've entered a temperature that doesn't fall under either of those two conditions. So we get nothing. But I can, just for illustration purposes, I can change that temperature to 92. And then it does print I'm going swimming as we predicted. So the program works as expected, but it's not encompassing all possible scenarios. So I'd like to be able to do that. But before I do, I'm going to add one little tool here, and that is allowing for a dynamic input. So this is a function in Python where I can type input parentheses and then a sort of descriptive phrase, and this will allow me to change what I start the program off with. So instead of making the program start with a fixed temperature, I can input that temperature dynamically. So let's see how that would look. So if I type in the temperature, I'll go ahead and do 97, doesn't matter. Okay, so that allowed me to type in 97. It came back with just a repetition of what I entered. Notice that it's in the form of a string, so we're going to have to handle that. So let's rewrite the program now to include a variable input like this. So notice how I'm clicking on the code block that I want to run, and let's see what happens. Okay, I'm allowing for a variable temperature. I'm going to type in 92, press enter, and it says I'm going swimming. If I run it again, let's just see if I can run it again and say 28. Okay, we get the expected response. Good. Now we really need to modify the program to handle the cases outside of the 90-degree and 30-degree boundaries. So I'm going to allow for that. And here's a diagram that would show the pattern that Python is going to follow. So I'm going to start with temperature greater than or equal to 90, and we print going swimming, less than or equal to 30, going sledding, otherwise. So I want to notice something, and that is that what I'm doing is specifying every other possible scenario. So I don't even need to write temperature greater than 30, less than 90 into my program. I can just use what's called an else. So else stands for every other scenario. I also am adding in this elif, that's how it's pronounced. Elif is a short way of saying else if, and this is the proper way to write Python conditional programs. So we have if one thing, and then elif is kind of like saying if that's not true, check this. If that's not true, then we say we handle all other possible conditions with the else statement. Also notice that I had to put an int in front of the input to change the change it from a string. Input naturally returns us a string, so we want it to return an integer to behave like the temperature that we're using in the program. So let's see how this works now. Okay, now I can enter a temperature. Let's try 92. It behaves as expected. Let's run it again. Try 29. Enter. Behaves as expected. And then finally, let's make sure we've handled other cases. Okay, so if I've done everything correctly, we've been able to handle every scenario. And when you're writing if statements or conditional programs, you want to think about, have I dealt with every possible scenario? Because if we haven't, then you'll get an error if you type in some input that doesn't fall under one of the conditions that we've specified. Okay, so that's an introduction to conditional statements.